am I among us? Hi, I'm Zach, and he's also Zach. That's weird, right? Welcome to my annual end of the year video where I talk for way too long about video games. I got a brand new computer this year, which you can see if you close your eyes and imagine a brand new computer. Because of that new computer, I went back and played through a lot of old games that my previous laptop couldn't handle. And I really want to talk about those games as well, so I'm splitting this year's video in half. The first half of this video will be me rambling about the games that I played this year that didn't actually come out this year. I might talk about these games at length, and I might drop a couple of sentences about them and then move on to the next game. Once I get bored of talking about games that didn't actually come out this year, I'll then move on to my Games of the Year list. If you only want to see my opinions on specific games, or if you just want to skip directly to my Games of the Year, have a look at the chapters of the video where I should have everything nice and organised. Also, on screen now are a bunch of big titles that came out this year that I just haven't played, so I won't be talking about them. If your favourite is one of these, and I'm sure it's a very good game, I unfortunately just haven't been able to play it yet. Now, without further ado, let's start talking about some games. I think you could reasonably call me a little bit of a Far Cry fan, as I've previously played 2, 3, and 5, and for some reason I've just never gotten around to playing the 4th one. I'm about 15 hours into it now, and I can confirm that, yeah, it's your bog standard Far Cry experience. Shoot guys, hunt animals, blow up vehicles, and climb radio towers. The thing that sets this one apart from the others, other than the setting and story, is the verticality of it all. All the other Far Cry games I've played take place in pretty regular terrain with the odd hill or peak here and there, but Far Cry 4 really does give you that sense of being in the mountainous Himalayas. There's a lot of areas only accessible by using your grappling hook. The wingsuit gets much more use here than it did in Far Cry 3, and there are these scrappy little helicopter things here and there that you can get into and fly about with if you get bored of having your car get flipped by rhinos. I've not beaten the game as of yet, but I have cleared all of the enemy camps and towers on the bottom half of the map, and I've been having a pretty good time doing that. The only thing that feels off is that the selection of weapons seems a bit limited. It's been a hot year or 3 since I've played a Far Cry game. I swear that there was more weapon choice than this in the previous titles, but maybe I'm just misremembering. Oh, and everyone was right. Those eagles are fucking annoying. Around the same time I was playing through Far Cry 4, I also started playing through Dying Light with my brother Yusuf. Playing both games around the same time was not a great idea, as I would constantly press the wrong buttons thinking I was playing the other game. For example, both games let you equip one of 4 weapons through a weapon wheel, and in Far Cry, you hold down the 1 key on the keyboard to open the weapon wheel, whereas in Dying Light, you hold down the tab key to open your weapon wheel. Instead of opening your weapons wheel, holding down the 1 key in Dying Light opens your throwables wheel, whereas in Far Cry, holding down the tab key opens your syringe wheel. This managed to accidentally get me killed in both games a few times. Dying Light is what you would get if you were to combine Left 4 Dead with Mirror's Edge. You run around the zombie-infested city of Haran, jumping from rooftop to rooftop and occasionally taking out the odd zombie horde here and there. Sometimes you even come across groups of thugs that work for the main antagonist of the game, and whenever we saw these guys, we would start fucking their shit up immediately. Like, it was on sight. It didn't matter if we were in the middle of a mission or if it was the middle of the night and we were running away from these nightmares. Whenever we saw groups of thugs, we could not stop ourselves from getting into a fight. The 2 main maps in the game are super fun to run and jump through, especially the second area, the Old Town, with its high roofs and plentiful zip lines. As of me writing this script, Yusuf and I have finished the main campaign and have moved on to the extra DLC called The Following, and while we really enjoyed the main campaign, I do have a couple of issues. First and foremost, why the hell was the final mission of the game not playable in co-op? Other than the opening mission, we had played through the whole game together, but once we got to the final showdown against the bad guy, the game told us to go back to single player if we wanted to do the final mission. That's so stupid! You have no idea how ready Yusuf and I were to beat the actual shit out of this dude. The other thing that annoys me is that the grapple hook counts as a throwable, which means that I stopped using throwables as soon as I got the grapple hook, because why the hell would I want to use some shitty firecrackers or flares instead of a goddamn grapple hook at any given moment? But other than those issues, we really enjoyed Dying Light, and we might go and check out the sequel at some point once we've gotten through the DLC. Last year, I started collecting old consoles here and there, and right at the end of the year in December, I managed to get my hands on a cheap, second-hand PlayStation 3, and the first game I played through fully was Red Dead Redemption. It's a bit dated now with how its shooting feels very basic and how all the missions in the game repeat the same structure of go to place and then shoot guys, except for the missions where you herd cattle, I guess. For when it first came out, Red Dead Redemption is an incredible game. For a PS3 era game, the graphics are something to behold, and the story was interesting enough to keep me entertained the whole way through. I will admit though, the story of this game made me more interested in seeing what things the characters here had gone through before the events of this game, but I think that's kind of the point. I'd say I would really love to get a remaster of the game on PC, but I've seen what Rockstar consider to be a good enough to release remaster, and I don't think Red Dead Redemption deserves that. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a long fucking game, holy shit. Like, goddamn, it took me just under 60 hours to get through the campaign of this game. I felt like I needed a vacation after finishing it due to just how long it took. In my opinion, Red Dead Redemption 2 is better than the first one in every single way. Graphically, RDR2, am I going to shorten this to RDR2? Am I going to do that? Am I gonna call it Red Dead 2? I'll call it Red Dead 2, fuck it. Graphically, Red Dead Redemption 2 is the most impressive looking game I've ever played in my life, bar none. It's just full of these gorgeous little details everywhere. The open world feels incredibly alive and full of things to do, unlike the comparatively barren first game. You'll remember I said that the first game's story made me want to see what the characters there had been through before the events of the first game, and that's more or less what the second game is about. I think that this is an unpopular opinion, but I much prefer Arthur Morgan over John Marston as a protagonist. I do think the story drags on a bit too long, and yeah, the Guarma chapter isn't as good as the rest of the game, but other than that, I can't really think of any other issues I have with the game. That is, of course, except for the fucking atrocious weapon equipping system. For some fucking reason, unlike the first game where you just had all of your guns with you all the time and you could just switch to whichever one you wanted to whenever, in Red Dead Redemption 2, you can only carry up to 2 secondary and 2 primary weapons, and that wouldn't even be that bad if it weren't for the fact that every single fucking time you get on your horse and sit on it for more than 10 seconds, your character will put your primary weapons away by tucking them into the horse's saddle, and I swear the game would never remember which ones I had equipped, because whenever I would get off my horse, I would either have 2 random rifles equipped or nothing at all, at which point I would need to go back over to my horse and sift through literally every single weapon I owned until I found the ones I wanted and then re-equipped them. But yeah, other than that, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a pretty fun time. Resident Evil 4 is one of the few games I'm going to talk about very briefly in this video, because I've only played a little bit of it, and I'm more or less just putting it in this video to make my stupid brain want to actually go back and play more of it instead of letting it gather dust in my backlog of games. I absolutely love horror games, but cannot play them on my own at all. There's this fine line between creepy games that have an unsettling vibe and straight horror games where I will feel physically ill if I think I might get jump scared, so usually I just watch my favorite YouTubers play through them instead. But through the years, I've heard just so much praise be heaped onto Resident Evil 4 that I felt the need to play it, and even though I'm only a couple of chapters in, I can definitely see how it's earned that praise. The combat, although clunky, perhaps intentionally so, feels very good, especially with how the enemies react to getting shot. And there's a slight feeling of campiness that maybe the game isn't taking itself entirely seriously, and as a big Doctor Who fan, I love it when things are a bit campy. But yeah, I can't really say much more about Resident Evil 4 without first playing more of it, so hopefully I'll actually go and do that. I'm so frustrated at both Omori and myself, because here is this game that has a super intriguing story, interesting characters, and a very creepy undertone, and I want to finish the game and see where the story goes, but then I get to the main gameplay and it's a turn-based battle RPG. And I'm sorry, but the whole your party members and enemies can have different moves which shuffles their stats around thing is not an interesting enough of a shake-up to the formula for me. Obviously, the golden standard for shaking up the formula of the turn-based battle is Undertale and Deltarune, which intersperse bullet hell mechanics into their turn-based battles. But surely there must be a better way to go about it than attack until you need to heal, then go back to attacking, and repeat until your enemy's HP drops to 0. I mention this because I want to go and play through the rest of Omori. I really do. I've played 6 hours of it so far, and everything other than the RPG mechanics have seriously been great. But when I'm sitting at my PC considering what game I should play, I'm always put off of Omori by those damn turn-based battles. I will get to it at some point. Similarly to Resident Evil 4, it's one of the main reasons I'm putting it in this video. Persona 4 was one of the games closest to not making it into this video, and that's because, just like Resident Evil 4, I've just not played all that much of it, having only put around 2.5 hours into it so far. This is the first Persona game I've played, and similarly to Omori, I think the most off-putting thing about this game is the turn-based combat. However, I will say that so far, Persona 4 has played more like a visual novel and less like an RPG. In the 2.5 hours I've played so far, I've had exactly a single combat encounter, and it was over fairly quickly. So I'm kind of hoping the RPG element of the game is a little less pronounced, and that the story and characters are more of the driving force behind the game, because so far I've quite enjoyed just progressing through what I'm assuming is the literal opening of the game. I'm actually cheating by talking about Titanfall 2 here, because in reality I beat it back in 2020, but like, I just really want to talk about it, so, you know, give me some slack. Oh, and also, I'm just talking about the single player, not the multiplayer. After playing through the campaign of this game, going back to Apex Legends really sucks because of just how nerfed the movement is compared to how it's handled here. The wall running, double jumping, and sliding all mesh together to create this amazing feeling of flowing movement that just never stops, and honestly, this unfortunately means that the worst parts of this game are when the game forces you to pilot the big and clunky Titans from which the game actually gets its title. I also really have to commend the level design here because every gimmick that comes along each time you switch scenery is just cool as hell. Oh cool, we're fighting our way through an assembly line that builds entire towns. Oh, now we're traveling between 2 points in time to fight enemies in different timelines. Oh, what's that? Now we're jumping from flying warship to flying warship in the middle of a massive skirmish. Each one is more creative than the last, and the unfortunate thing is that it's just over so fast. It takes just under 5 hours the first time you play through the campaign. While it isn't inherently a bad thing, it would be kinda sick if there was like a couple more levels to blaze through. But as it is, it's a bloody good campaign from start to finish, and I can now count myself as part of the group of people that wish Respawn were working on Titanfall 3 instead of nerfing Pathfinder in Apex Legends yet again. Madness, Project Nexus, is a tie-in game to one of the coolest animated series to have ever been put on Newgrounds back in the day, and if you've never seen it, I seriously recommend it, especially if you're into funny cartoon dudes absolutely tearing each other up. It is very good and still ongoing. But how's the game, you ask? It's pretty good. Unlike the flat style that the series goes for, this looks more like it's trying to imitate the whole cel-shaded cartoony thing that the Borderlands series has going on, with chunky outlines for everything. The gameplay consists of entering rooms, killing everyone you see in said rooms using literally whatever weapons you can get your hands on, and then proceeding to more rooms where, surprise surprise, there's even more guys waiting to be turned into a fine red mist. I play through the whole campaign with Yusuf in co-op, and I won't lie, there's a little bit of jankiness to the game sometimes, and it can be a little tricky to aim ranged weapons, but other than that, it's a pretty fun, if not a bit of a hyper-violent time, and the soundtrack goes hard as hell. Forza Horizon 4 is the only Forza game I've ever played, and I can confidently say that it's the best racing game I've ever played that doesn't allow smashing rival cars out of the way as a viable strategy. As a genre, racing games are something I enjoy, but don't play all too often, and when it comes to it, I prefer them to be more on the demolition derby side of things, with a bit more destruction and chaos added to the races. While it may be quite a plain racing game in that regard, it does feel very fun to play. All of the cars feel nice and weighty, and the controls feel tight and responsive. The map is big and varied terrain-wise, although the random changing of the season is a little annoying as it seems to lock you out of certain multiplayer features depending on what season you're in. The weird battle royale mode, the Eliminator, is also really fun. Overall, I would say it's a solid racing game, and if I feel like playing a race or two with a more realistic playstyle, Forza Horizon 4 is my current go-to game. The last Need for Speed game I had played before Payback was Underground 2, which according to Google came out in 2004. I feel old now. Need for Speed Payback is fine. I mostly included it because I quite like that clip I used earlier of that car ramming the shit out of me. In fact, the only reason I picked it up in the first place is because it went on a random 90% off sale during the summer, and I thought, sure, why not? And then I later went and did the exact same thing with Need for Speed Heat, so maybe I'll end up talking about that game next year. Need for Speed Payback has a story, but it's very, very B-movie-esque, and realistically, you're not playing a Need for Speed game for the plot. You're here to drive fast cars and maybe escape the occasional police chase. I'd probably be a bit more critical of the game if I, A, had paid full price for it, and B, if I was actually familiar with more recent Need for Speed games. But since neither of those two apply to me, I'll just say that Payback is fine and move on. CLUSTERTRUCK is a combination of The Floor is Lava and many, many drunk drivers. Here is 15 seconds of unedited gameplay. The whole game is basically just more of that. You get the gist. If you're wondering why there's no gameplay footage on the screen right now, that's because, for some fucking reason, I could not get Dishonored to launch no matter what I did. Which is really weird, because I've played through the whole game twice on this exact same PC, and I've not changed anything about the computer since then. I put roughly 30 hours into the game back in early October, and then, when I wanted to get footage of it for this video, it just would not launch. So, hang on. Here's Rabid Retrospect Games gameplay instead of mine. Other than this very annoying issue, I actually did have a really good time with Dishonored 2, especially when it feels like everyone who liked the first game was kinda disappointed by the second one. I mean, it isn't as good as the first one, but it's not far off. Like I said a minute ago, I played through the game 2 times, once as Emily and once as Corvo. As Emily, I did a no-kills playthrough where I tried to get through the game as stealthily as possible, while also finding all of the alternative, non-lethal ways of dealing with the targets, which seems to me to be the way that the game would prefer you play. And as Corvo, I did a full-on murder rampage playthrough without any of the magical abilities. I enjoyed both playthroughs, although the second one with Corvo was certainly a lot shorter than the pacifist one I did with Emily, but that's to be expected. I also just really love the aesthetics of the world that these games take place in. The whole whale punk thing really does it for me. So, if in the future they do make a Dishonored 3, I'd be down for yet another romp through Dunwall. If they do make a Dishonored 3 though, I hope it actually fucking works. It's better if I don't tell you much about Before Your Eyes, because that's the best way to experience it. The only thing I'll tell you is that you get to view a person's entire life from start to finish, but every time you blink, time passes. It's like the Weeping Angel equivalent of a video game. Go and try it. It's a short but emotional little game that only took me about an hour and a half to get through. GRIS is a very artsy and slow platformer. I haven't gotten around to finishing it yet, and I'll be honest with you here, I don't really get the whole vibe it's trying to go for. I've not really clicked with it, and I don't think I'm going to, but I will give it this. It is very pretty looking. Yeah, that's all I got for this one. Let's move on. Similarly to the last one, I'm not 100% sure what exact vibe this game is going for, although I think that this one is actually about depression. Milk outside a bag of 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 milk is a very dark and creepy game about a girl who is scared of milk. Okay, I don't really know what exact message the game is trying to get through to me, but I can sort of make out the shape of it, if that makes sense. Look, you've heard the title of the game. It's a weird one. I'm a little bit out of my depth here, as I'm not really the kind of person that this game is going to connect with. Oh, and fun fact, this game is actually a sequel to an equally weird and dark game that has an equally bizarre and long title. And that game is called Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk. The Darkside Detective is a very simple point-and-click adventure game that is clearly paying homage to creepy classics such as The X-Files and Twin Peaks. However, instead of taking itself seriously and trying to focus on the horror aspect of hauntings, otherworldly demons and nightmarish creatures, it instead fully commits to comedy, utilizing a very dry type of humor, and I think it works out pretty well. You play as Detective Francis McQueen, and are joined by a partner who for some reason is skeptical of all the otherworldly things that we see literally every case. These two make up the Darkside division of the police force, and are in charge of investigating cases that are more on the abnormal side. Gameplay-wise, it's your run-of-the-mill point-and-click adventure game with puzzles that range from easy to, slightly less easy. Yeah, the game's not particularly hard, and your enjoyment is going to be based more on whether or not you gel with the game's sense of humor, which I certainly do. It's a very short experience, but if you're in the mood for some witty hauntings, you've got the right game. There Is No Game, Wrong Dimension is also point and click, but it's not a game, as the title very clearly states. The whole thing is about trying to actually find a game to play, which, let me remind you once again, is something that obviously isn't here. Lengthwise, Wrong Dimension is a bit chunkier than the Darkside Detective, as where in that game it took me about 4.5 hours to get through every case, it only took me about 6 hours to finish this non-game. The puzzles here are quite fun to get through and are certainly a lot trickier than the ones in Darkside Detective. However, and this is gonna sound mean, the writing and especially the acting here are kind of cringeworthy at points, and I unfortunately couldn't tell if that was intentional or not. I'm not sure whether the game wanted me to take parts of it seriously, or if I was supposed to go, oh, that's dumb, and laugh. But other than that, and a funky progress-halting bug that they have since patched out, I didn't have any issues with the game, and I would say that it's a fun time if you're looking for something that's quite a bit meta. Shantae, Half-Genie Hero is my second foray into the Shantae series. I've previously played and finished Pirate's Curse, and while I don't think this is quite as good as that one, it is a good little Metroidvania. It's a very cute game, controls very well, and the soundtrack slaps. The levels are also nice and varied, especially the Mermaid Factory, which is such a cool concept for a level. I will say though, if you're anything like me and you try to do every single side activity before progressing through the main story, one of the items you can get makes the game piss easy, and I feel like maybe you shouldn't be able to get that item until you've actually beaten the game. Like, I had a dumb brain moment while fighting the final boss of the game where I just could not figure out how to get to the stage of the fight where you damage it. And even though I kept getting hit over and over and over again, just because I had this one item, I was more or less immortal. And to me, that seems a bit too overpowered to have. The story is very silly, anime-esque and cliched, but it's only there to connect all the different levels together, and I think that the game is aware of this. In conclusion, Half-Genie Hero is a good entry for the Shantae series, but I still wouldn't recommend it over Pirate's Curse to any newcomers to the series. my best friend Melly finds a lot of enjoyment just driving from place to place in Euro Truck Simulator 2. While I myself find that game to be a dreadfully boring affair, I now at least understand how he gets that enjoyment, because sailing from island to island in Sea of Thieves gives me the exact same enjoyment. Yes, having intense cannon fights with other ships while the skies above are turning inside out, and the ship is on fire, and the mast has fallen over, and there are leaks below deck, and the mast has fallen over, and oh god, we're being boarded, fuck. While all of that is really fun, there is something very calming about just sailing the sea lazily while occasionally spotting some supplies floating in the distance, heading on over, lowering anchor and harpooning them all on board that is just as enjoyable to me as the more action-packed and exciting gameplay of Sea of Thieves. But the game isn't perfect. While I completely understand why there's no real progression system in the game and why all the unlocks are just cosmetics, I'm not afraid to admit that I'm gamer-brained and that I do actually like unlocking new gameplay mechanics. Someone playing Sea of Thieves for the first time has access to pretty much every single gameplay mechanic that someone who has put over 1,000 hours into the game has. Yes, I know that you can progress your level with the different trading companies, but all that does is unlock more cosmetics or more ways to unlock even more cosmetics. And while ship combat is brilliantly done and very dynamic, if I'm battling another ship and it gets to the point where it looks like we'll be boarding each other, then it just feels like luck is the only determining factor on whose gunshot will actually be the one to knock the other player down. These flaws don't ruin the game for me though, as especially with a few friends who vibe with the calmer side of the game, I could play for hours at a time. Also, holy shit, isn't that water utterly stunning? I think we can all agree that when No Man's Sky first released, it was quite the unfinished mess. While I myself didn't play it back when it first came out, I am aware of how it was received critically by those who had been waiting for the game for years. It sort of looked like Hello Games had overpromised and underdelivered due to just how hyped up the game had become. It sucks to see how lazy game developers can get when they just know that their game is going to sell well. Let's just take a quick look on Google to see how little they've updated the game since it released in 2016. I bet they've hardly touched— holy shit! They've released 21 free major updates to the game! Yeah, I'm a big fan of just how far Hello Games have gone to make No Man's Sky the game that they originally promised, and way more than that. As of this video, I've only had the chance of putting around 6 hours into the game, and I feel like I haven't even finished the tutorial yet. There's just so much to see and do, it's actually quite overwhelming. So, while I might not have a lot to say about No Man's Sky for the time being, I'm really looking forward to getting dug right into it once I actually have some free time on my hands. The final game I'll be talking about before I actually get to the best games that came out this year is Demon Turf. This is a 3D platformer that visually is quite similar to Here Comes Nico from last year in the way that the environments are 3D, but all the characters are 2D sprites. You play as Beebs, who is this bratty little demon kid who wants to take over the underworld by beating up all of the leaders of the different demon factions. While playing through the levels, you can have Beebs put down up to 3 flags at any point, and these flags act as checkpoints, and you can also fast travel between them. The main thing that makes this game fun is all of the crazy moves that Beebs can pull off, and how you can utilize those moves to skip portions of levels if you're clever enough. You have a standard double jump, and you have a mid-air spin that you can perform to briefly slow yourself before falling, and by combining these, you can pull off a sort of triple long jump, which you can also bounce out of into another move. Beebs can also perform Mario's signature triple jump and sidestep jump. You also unlock 4 abilities as you progress through the game that you can switch between at any time after you've unlocked them. However, while I really like one of these abilities, my feelings towards the other 3 are more mixed. The first unlock is a grapple hook that lets you pull yourself towards certain objects and also allows you to pull some environmental objects and enemies towards yourself. Much like the level design, which I'll get to in just a moment, the grapple hook ends up feeling very janky. On top of that, since it can only be used on certain objects, it ends up being very situational. The second unlock allows Beebs to turn into a sort of dragon snake wheel thing, and this is the one that I like. It lets you speed up very fast and pull off some really fun platforming skips if you utilize it well enough. The third unlock lets Beebs turn into a bird and glide forward for as long as you like. While I don't outright dislike this one, I feel like it trivializes a lot of the earlier sections in the game, as you can now just glide over large gaps if you get enough height, and it doesn't require any real skill to pull off, unlike the burnout tire ability. The final ability you unlock is a slowdown shot that I used maybe twice in the whole game. It's mainly just here to make combat easier. Speaking of which, hey, this game has combat, and unfortunately, it's not very good. Other than the boss fights, which are actually quite fun, the combat always just stops the momentum of the platforming in its tracks and forces you to just circle enemies and mash the attack button for a few moments before the game says, okay, you can keep on doing the fun part now. I honestly just think that the game would be better as a whole if all the combat was removed and the boss fights were reworked to be more platforming focused. The last thing I want to talk about is the level design. The level design is quite weird, and as I said a minute ago, it gives off this janky feeling. As I'm writing this script now, I'm trying to think of a single level that stands out, and I can't really think of one, but that's because all the levels here are just gauntlets through which you need to use the awesome moveset to blaze your way through. And in the end, that awesome moveset is what makes Demon Turf worth playing. I didn't end up going for 100% completion, but that's just because there is a lot of things to do. And after a while, because of how all the levels just blend together, I wanted to beat the final boss and move on from the game. And if you're wondering why I've talked so much about this game, it's because I'm going to talk about it even more later in this video. Lastly, before I move on to talking about the games that actually did come out this year, I'm going to rapidly clump together a bunch of other media that came out this year that I also enjoyed. I only went to the cinema twice this year. Doctor Strange 2: Dimensions of Crazy was a fun movie that I controversially enjoyed more than the first one, and Thor 4 was not as good as Thor 1 or 3, but it was better than Thor 2, and that's something, I guess. Better Call Saul had its phenomenal final season this year, where 2 of the episodes actually made me gasp out loud. If you've not seen Better Call Saul yet, you need to get on that shit. It is amazing. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared made the leap from endearing yet creepy YouTube series to endearing yet creepy TV show. Some seriously fucked up shit happens to some puppets, and I just cannot look away from it. The Walking Dead finally ended, I think. Oh what? There's more coming next year? Multiple spin-offs? I mean, it is kind of ironic how zombie-like this series has become at this point. I finally got my act together and watched the first 2 seasons of Mob Psycho 100 this year, and I can now say I'm a certified Reagan stan. I love the funny hand thing he does. I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it was a lot. I watched a movie called Falling for Christmas with my mum, and we laughed at how bad it was the whole way through. The Boys Season 3 had actual cockvore in its first episode. Stranger Things 4 finally came out, and even though I thought I was bored of the series, it still managed to suck me back in with just how compellingly it tells its story. Love is War Season 3 aired, and it is still my favourite anime despite being a rom-com. Spy X Family was very cute and wholesome, and I like it when Anya does the funny troll face. Cyberpunk Edgerunners was so good that it made both me and my brother buy Cyberpunk 2077. No, we still haven't played the fucking game. Inside Job Part 2 came out, and while it was fine, I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first part. Love, Death and Robots Volume 3 was pretty good. My favourite episode is the one about the lady who crashes onto a sentient planet. The episode called Jabaro was really fucking weird though. I don't know why people like it so much. I don't understand it. We got 3 episodes of Doctor Who this year. Eve of the Daleks, which is a time loop story where they don't actually establish how the fucking time loop works. Legend of the Sea Devils, which is genuinely the worst episode of Doctor Who I have ever had the displeasure of watching. And finally, The Power of the Doctor, Jodie Whittaker's final outing as the 13th Doctor, is an absolute mixed mess of an episode. But now that the Doctor has regenerated, and now that the entire show is about to be changed up by a new production crew, and now that Russell T Davies is returning as showrunner, and now that Chris Chibnall has finally fucked off, I am so excited for the future of this show. And now, for real, let's actually move on to my games of the year, starting with number 13. Crypt is an utterly phenomenal game. I've never played anything like it before in my life. If you've got free time right now, go and play it. It's on Steam and free. Earlier in this video, I mentioned that I find it really hard to play through horror games, and yet this game is just so good that I managed to push my way through. If you're wondering why it's so low down on the list, it's for reasons that I can't talk about because I don't want to spoil the game for you. Speaking of which, I'm going to talk about spoilers now, so this is your last chance to go and play the game before I spoil it for you. I'll give you a few more seconds. Seriously, pause this video and go play the game. You'll get through it in less than an hour. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Spoiler time starts now. Okay, I lied. Crypt is a piece of shit, but it was designed to be that way. This game was made by a dude named Veilfisk on YouTube, who I think might genuinely hate his friends. Your goal here is to find 4 keys so that you can open a big door and escape the crypt, but there's a scrunkly little monster that will beeline directly towards you as soon as you've made too much progress. And none of the puzzles make any sense at all. The most entertaining thing about this game is watching other people play it blindly. Veilfisk himself made a video about the game titled I Made a Torture Game, and it is very entertaining. I highly recommend you check both that video and the rest of Veilfisk's channel out. Okay, I promise you, this one is not intentionally shit. You Will open parenthesis, not close parenthesis, remain is a very short free game about a survivor of some kind of apocalypse. The aforementioned apocalypse is left intentionally ambiguous, so while you're playing as this weird looking dude, you're always just a tiny bit on edge about what exactly might be outside of the apartment that you're holed up in. Or at least, while I think it's about a guy who survived an apocalypse, it might also be about depression. It can be hard to tell sometimes with these indie games. I can't say more about the game without basically just telling you every single thing about it because of how short it is. I got through it in less than 30 minutes. There's a dog in it.
What the dog doing?
Aperture Desk Job is less of an actual game and more of a tutorial on how to use all the different buttons that are on the new Steam Deck. Thankfully though, Valve didn't limit the game to Steam Decks, you can play it on a regular computer as well. I'm not sure if every controller works, but I was able to get both my Switch Joy-Cons and my PS4 controller to work with the game. But enough about techno jargon, how is the game? Well, it's frustrating because as soon as you start up the game, that fantastic Valve humor starts doing the legwork and it feels like we're back in the days of playing through Portal 2 again. The game is running in Source 2 and it looks great, but I just wish that Valve would make a new game and not just a tech demo. And yes, I hear some of you saying that they just released Half-Life Alyx a year or two back, but that feels equally like a tech demo to me. If Aperture Desk Job is a little treat that Steam Deck owners get to have, then Half-Life Alyx is a slightly less little treat that Steam Index owners got to have. But I don't own a Steam Index, and I would also wager that neither do a majority of Half-Life fans. VR is really cool, but unfortunately, really expensive as well. But with Desk Job, it looks like Valve are heading back towards making more traditional video games. Valve, please make more games. If this is how cool a tech demo made by Valve is, and might I add that this tech demo is like 80% about fucking toilets? Like, I genuinely wasn't aware that the Aperture Science toilet division was this big. Then I can't wait to see what we'll get when they finally do get around to making video games again. I'm a massive fan of Crypt of the Necrodancer. How could you tell? So, it was pretty sweet when out of nowhere we got some brand new DLC for the game. Crypt of the Necrodancer Synchrony adds in 3 brand new characters, each of whom is very unique and unlike any of the other playable characters that are already in the game. Clarinetta wields a super long sword that you have to use entire beats to manually swing. Suzu dashes forward after killing an enemy and doesn't stop until she hits a wall. Anything that gets caught in that dash gets completely obliterated. And the final playable character, Chaunter, allows you to possess literally any of the enemies in the game and use all of their attacks. Now, while the new characters are fun, the main appeal of this DLC comes from the fact that they added in online multiplayer. Previously, Necrodancer only had split-screen co-op, and while it wasn't bad per se, it meant that you could only have a maximum of 2 players, and those 2 players would need to stick together because it didn't actually split the screen. It would show both players on one screen, and if they got further away from each other, then the screen would zoom out to keep them both in frame, and that made playing the game quite difficult. And did I mention that the player count has gone up from a maximum of 2 players per game to 8 players per game? Watching 8 players all playing as different characters trying to stick to the beat as they all power through a level is very entertaining. Look, I see you judging me, but even though it's a live service mobile game with microtransactions, Marvel Snap is surprisingly pretty damn good. It's a deck builder game where you collect various Marvel heroes and villains as cards and battle against other players in an attempt to take over 3 randomly generated locations each game. The battles themselves are short, only lasting 6 turns, and to match these short battles, you're only allowed to have 12 cards in your deck. This means that there are unfathomable amounts of differently styled decks that you can build. There's a sort of rank gambling gameplay mechanic where if you think you're going to win the game, you can snap to double the amount of cubes you will win from your opponent if you actually do win. However, if you lose the game, you have to give your opponent your cubes. The cubes here are just like rank points. You need more cubes to go up the ranks, and if you lose cubes, you go down the ranks. Each game starts with only 1 cube up for grabs, and if a game reaches its final 6th turn without either player having forfeited, then that goes up to 2 cubes. So if a game lasts 6 turns and neither player snaps, then whoever loses the game pays 2 cubes to the winner. However, if one player decides to snap, then that would go up to 4, and if both players snap, then that number would go up to 8 cubes. This is a very fun way to try and gain ranks faster. In the end, it's just a really good deck builder that you can hop into and play a few games whenever you feel like it. Another freebie, Outcore is this year's meta game, as in it's a video game that is itself actually about video games. You play as yourself, and you help this character named Lumi try to figure out how she ended up on your desktop. Similarly to other games of this variety, you have to mess about with files and interact with different parts of your computer. There's puzzles where you have to draw things in paint, and there's a part of the game where depending on what shortcuts you have on your desktop, different minigames will play out. For example, on my desktop there's a Minecraft shortcut, and because of that, I ended up having to play through a short Minecraft theme minigame. However, the whole game does not actually take place on your desktop, and there are large sections of the game that play more like a 2D platformer. These parts range from fun to somewhat frustrating, but the frustrating parts can thankfully be gotten through fairly quickly. There's also some creepy undertones, and later in the game it does play around with some creepy concepts, but there's no jump scares or anything like that. Outcore tries its hand at comedy as well by parodying a lot of other games and genres, and it is pretty funny at times. There's even like a good 15-minute section where the whole thing becomes an Undertale parody, and if that's not enough to get you to try the game, then I don't know what will. Using child slaves to extract blood from unwilling innocent prisoners in order to feed a colony of vampires is a bad thing. Oh, sorry, this is RimWorld. What I meant to say was, using child slaves to extract blood from unwilling innocent prisoners in order to feed a colony of vampires is cool as fuck. RimWorld Biotech is the 3rd bit of RimWorld DLC that has been released for the game, and while royalty and especially ideology didn't really interest me, Biotech has refueled my passion for the game and adds in so much stuff. Instead of every colonist being a normal human, you can now come across vampires, wolf people, mole men, and so much more. The DLC adds children into the game who, depending on their age, they'll need different things like carers or classrooms to learn in. When child colonists reach a certain age, you get to decide which of their traits should be upgraded, and your choice of which traits can be upgraded is based on how many learning opportunities they have had in your colony. Another thing Biotech adds is a much larger variety of droids to the game. You can now have certain colonists implanted with a special controller that allows them to bond with and control different kinds of robots. Some robots simply sweep the floor or help with construction, while others can act as bodyguard for your colonists or as a brutal defense mechanism against would-be raiders. My current colony is being run by a psychic 13-year-old who uses a shotgun to put down raiders, and if that's not awesome as hell, I don't know what is. Risk of Rain 2 got its first ever bit of DLC this year, and it is pretty schmackin'. It added in around 6 new stages, a bunch of new items, a new kind of item, and 2 new survivors, those being the Railgunner and the Void Fiend. The Railgunner does big damage using her massive gun, which if you time the reloads off correctly, you get a damage boost, and the Void Fiend becomes angrier as time goes past, and if his anger gauge fills up, he turns into Red Void Fiend, and all of his attacks and abilities become more aggressive. Both of them are great additions to the roster of survivors. Then there's the new tier of purple items called Void items. They take your already existing items and corrupt them into weird new ones. For example, the regular Lensmaker's glasses gives you an additional 10% chance to do critical damage, but the corrupted version, the Lost Seer's lenses, gives you a 0.5% chance of instantly killing non-boss enemies. The new stages are all very fun to traverse and help keep new loops fresh. This DLC also adds in an alternate final area and boss, and that boss is a giant evil crab. Very good DLC. I hope we get even more at some point so that I can keep pouring even more hours into Risk of Rain 2. Beacon Pines is just barely a step above a visual novel, but its main gameplay mechanic is so good, and that's the reason why it's higher up on my list. Well, that, and the fact that the game's story is really interesting the whole way through. It can be quite tricky to have the main characters of a story be children, and then actually have them act like children instead of adults. And the game is very nice to look at. I mean, just look at all these fluffy guys. I sure hope nothing sinister is going on in this cute little town. Oh boy, wouldn't that be a shame? The main gameplay mechanic that I mentioned a moment ago is that you find different words as you explore the town of Beacon Pines, and then, during certain parts of the game, you can choose which word to use to change the course of the story. However, once you've gone down one path, that doesn't mean you're stuck on that path. Being able to go back and change the choices you've made during the course of the story is an actual gameplay mechanic. It's so nice to be able to play a game that has multiple endings, where if you want to see all of those endings, you don't have to save scum constantly throughout the whole game. This allows you to go down one path, find new words, and then go back to previous choices and change those choices. And hopefully, down one of these paths, you'll be able to find out just what shady shit is going on in the town of Beacon Pines. Demon Turf Neon Splash is a sort of expansion slash half sequel to Demon Turf that cut a lot of the fat off of the original game. Do you remember earlier in the video where I was actually talking about Demon Turf, how I said that not all of the abilities were that good and that the combat was very clunky and that the game would have been better as a whole if it just hadn't had combat? Well, in Neon Splash, they have reworked one of the abilities, axed the other two, and completely removed combat. In my opinion, the game is all the better for it. With the newly added triple jump, it feels like you're putting together a mad combo of every move and ability that you have in order to get through each stage as fast as possible. There's far less levels here than there are in the original Demon Turf, and the hub has been completely replaced with a level select screen. The flag placing mechanic has also been reworked here. Now, instead of only being able to place up to 3 flags, you can place as many as you'd like. However, upon placing a new one, your previous flag gets deleted, which means you can only fast travel between the last flag you placed and the start of the level. It's a fairly brief game. I 100%ed it in just under 4 hours, but it's also fairly cheap. So if you're looking for a short and sweet platformer, you can't go wrong with Demon Turf Neon Splash. Hey, remember the Stanley Parable? That game that came out way back in 2013? Yeah, this is just that again, but they stuck the words Ultra Deluxe on it. It's not secretly a sequel to the original game or anything, definitely not. Here, let's look at some random images that have nothing to do with the game at all. This is just a picture of a bucket. What could this have to do with the Stanley Parable? Nothing. That's what. Ew, a Funko Pop. I actually can't believe some people collect these. They all look the same. You can barely tell what character they're supposed to represent. Okay, this is like a symbol for fast forwarding or something. I can't really see a way that this is relevant to the Stanley Parable. So since this is still just a Stanley Parable and not anything new, that means that my favorite ending is still the broom closet ending. There's no fucking vampires in this game. That's not a joke, by the way. There really isn't. I've checked. Vampire Survivors is a game that literally created a whole new subgenre of roguelite overnight. Instead of dodging endless patterns of bullets, you yourself are the one spewing out all of the bullets, and it's up to you to schmoove in such a way so that said bullets will actually hit the endless hordes of enemies that are literally swarming the screen. Every run in this game starts out looking like this, but then less than 10 minutes later, the whole thing looks more like a kaleidoscope than a game. And don't let the game trick you. When you start up the game for the first time, it seems deceptively simple. Get a maximum of 6 weapons and 6 passive items by collecting little crystals that drop from enemies, and then upgrade and combine them using the aforementioned crystals. But then a few runs later, you unlock a map and you realize that there are passive items scattered throughout the map that you can walk to, which allow you to collect more than 6 passive items, and then you see that there are other things marked on the map, things you've not seen before. Then suddenly you're trying to put together builds where you make as many coins as possible because you need the coins to be able to afford all of the upgrades that you slowly start unlocking. And then you get to the 30-minute mark and you're utterly destroyed by some kind of Reaper enemy, but you notice that it seemed to take damage before you died. Is there some way to kill it? Next, you're choosing special mutators that change entire aspects of the game because a funny little card called a randomazo came out of a chest. What I'm trying to say is there is a lot of content in this game, and that's not even including the DLC that just came out earlier this month, which I can't really talk about because I've just not had the time to play it yet. But I can guarantee it adds like 5 or 6 new gameplay mechanics, because why the hell wouldn't it? Vampire Survivors is an insanely good game, and if you're a fan of roguelites who hasn't given it a go because graphically it looks a little basic, I urge you, do yourself a favor and pick this game up. You will regret it, but only because of how many hours you will lose trying to find the vampires that they very clearly forgot to put in the game. Finally, we have arrived at my game of the year. All of the other games I've talked about until now are all amazing in their own right, but there was one game that for me surpassed all the others. My game of the year for 2022 is... Teardown is such an interesting game because they made this incredible engine where literally every voxel on screen can be destroyed, but what they decided to do with that engine is make a heist game. I'd seen the destruction in Teardown before, and it is incredible, but then just using that destruction engine to make a heist game seemed like a waste to me. After I got my new PC this year, which meant I could actually run the game, I gave it a try, and man was I wrong. Most of the missions in this game require you to steal certain objects scattered around the map. However, as soon as you pick up one of these objects, an alarm will sound, and then you'll only have 60 seconds to collect the rest of the items that you need. This means that you need to plan out your route through the map before picking up any of the items. And that is where the beauty of the destruction comes into play. Is there a wall in the way of your plan? Put a hole in it. Need quicker access to a higher floor? Ram a crane into the building and use it as a ramp. Need to get over this river? Park a boat down there, knock trees onto it, and construct a makeshift bridge out of them. And then, once you've finally gotten everything into place, you start your heist, everything goes to plan, and then with only 2 objectives left to pick up, you run out of time. So slowly, you start refining your plan, seeing where you can make slight adjustments to shave off a second or two, until finally, after trial and error, you manage to pull off the heist. I genuinely had one heist where it took me just over an hour and a half to set up everything I needed, started, and I just barely managed to complete every objective with less than 1 second remaining on the clock. On the same day that Vampire Survivors released its new DLC, Teardown also got a free expansion that added a new map and 5 new missions that take place on that map, and I sat down just to play through one of the missions, and 6 hours later, I had fully completed them all. This combination of careful planning and insane destruction makes this a truly special game, and that is why Teardown is my game of the year for 2022. Thank you for watching.